according to science, you are the most alert you will be right now than at any time in the day. So given that, we fully expect this will be the single greatest panel that you have ever come to. So with that, my name is Brandman Busteed. I'm president of Kaplan University Partners. And I'm delighted to moderate this panel because it's right down the alley of all the research that I've been involved with in my previous role at Gallup and in work that I'm doing at Kaplan, which is about connectivity between the workplace and higher education. And I can't think of a better group to be talking about it than we have here. So we have John Kaplan from Discover. We've got Rachel Carlson from Guild. We've got Chris Trout from Disney. We've got Gary Brahm from Brandman University. And we've got Cara Forney from the University of Arizona. And I'm going to kick it off, right? You know the title of the panel. You've got bios of the folks there, so we're going to save that and let you discover that in another way. And I want to start off, though, asking Rachel this question. You know, the tagline that Guild has used is education as a benefit. And I just want to make sure we kind of level set with the audience. Tell us exactly what's going on here, right? I think some people know, but give us an overview of exactly what this means.
Sure. So when we were starting our research and formulating what Guild was going to look like, we were seeing a travesty, which was that tuition reimbursement was this heralded benefit by all these companies, but when you unpacked it, only the most wealthy employees and arguably the ones in least need of the $5,000 subsidy were the ones capable of using it, because it sat in a budget that looked nothing like a benefit. It was by no means distributed, which we think of benefits as something that everyone in the company should have access to, and it had no tie to the business case. And when you look at the origins of healthcare benefits, 401k, the entire benefit stack, those were designed to tie to the core business case of recruitment, retention, upskilling, et cetera. And so that's where it started for us. But Chris and I were just talking about this, and you were pushing me that it's probably become more than a benefit for us today. It's a helpful signal that we use to help describe to folks that what we believe a program like this should be is something that's a benefit available to all your employees, but deeply tied to your business case. But I think we're hoping that it's come to mean more as it relates to the company ethos, the way it treats its employees, and the signal it sends to the consumer market about how they want to be viewed as an American corporate citizen.
And just very quickly, just tell us a little bit more about the basics. So I'm an employee at one of the companies that Guild partners with, right? What's my experience, right? How do I hear about this? Just give us some of the basics so everybody's kind of locked in on what it is, and then I want to kind of talk to some of the folks on the corporate side about their views of this. So.
Sure. So we approach it like a consumer experience would, which is a student or a prospective employee who might become a student needs to hear about something from different points of authenticity and often 7 different times in order to take it seriously and understand how it works. So we obviously start in partnership with employers like Discover and Disney, thinking through what is your employee experience, how do you want your employees to hear about this, how do you tell them about other benefits? Then we think about, how does this tie to your business case? Is this something you want to be talking about primarily to your incoming job funnel? Is it something you want to be a retention benefit, therefore really focused on your employees who work there today and have been there for years, maybe decades? And then internal to Guild, we've provided the coaching and advising, not just enrollment advising, but also benefits management, all of the questions and answers that companies used to have to field themselves. And we've learned that that's been an important part, because when we met Chipotle, they had a team of 17 trying to run this program themselves. They were able to let that team of 17 employee success folks go work on other initiatives for their employees. Meanwhile, Guild took over those responsibilities to ensure that every employee understood the choice they had in attending our many schools, as well as how to use the funding, and really answered the important question of, is this too good to be true? Because the number of employees who ask that question is unbelievable. That's
interesting. So not too different from what we've learned about retention and success strategies for students in traditional university settings. There's a lot of student services, what we might call wraparound services, that are pretty critical to making this work. So look, as you mentioned, things like tuition reimbursement have been benefits that have been around for a long time. But something feels very new, and it probably is very new in terms of this era right now. And so I'm going to ask John and Chris to both comment on this from your perspective, right? You guys have jumped into this, been pioneers in many respects in terms of how kind of big and robust you have kind of gone in this initiative. But what do you see as new and different now, right? Is this taking off? Is this just some, a handful of really enlightened corporations? Give us some perspective on that.
Yeah, thank you. There are probably three big things that are different. Probably the biggest thing is the way the corporation starts thinking about education. I mean, for our employees, education as a benefit makes a lot of sense. It doesn't really make a lot of sense to the company, or at least it doesn't place this as high as it should be on the scheme of importance. I mean, for us, it's a strategic talent driver. And that's something that within the company, when you start talking about it that way, that changes the way we think about it and the seriousness with which we approach it. I'd say that the second thing that changed from the employee perspective is Guild provides us partnerships with universities that have awesome student success. And that's one thing we found out is when we really looked into our data, our employees actually don't choose their educational programs very well. I mean, there are information asymmetries, so they ended up choosing programs that actually don't have high student outcomes. And by narrowing the selection down to just those that have high student outcomes, it's a huge advantage for our employees. I'd say the third thing that's changed is all those wraparound services. I had the opportunity, I was in Denver on Friday, I had the opportunity to do call listening and hear the Guild representatives talk to our employees. And I mean, it was moving, just the way they encouraged our employees and talked them through difficult situations in their lives as well as in their studies. So those three big things that have changed, it's a game changer for us.
Yeah.
I'd say similarly. First of all, but I want to expand it more broadly. I think there's a number of things happening in the marketplace and the environment overall that have kind of set the table for this, if you will. One, from an employer standpoint, there is so many new jobs that are either coming or that are here already. So it is very much shifting from an employer standpoint how you have to differentiate yourself. It's not just about the jobs of today, it's about the jobs of tomorrow, and it's about the environment. From an employee standpoint, I would talk about it that employees now have more choice than they've had before. But employees are looking for an environment. It's not just about I need a job, and it's not just about I need a job and where can I find the highest paying job. It's where can I find a job in a place that I feel I can thrive, and I can thrive for today and tomorrow. I think that's really important. And then to John's point, what we discovered when we were planning this was all about this notion of working adults and what working adults need. And when you peel it back, working adults need some very different things in an education setting than do your traditional student, right? And so we had to think about that from the employee experience standpoint of building something that met their needs, recognizing the choice they had. And then the third element that I think this whole, like I heard last night, 10 years ago, this event took place. It's a very small gathering, and look at it today, 10 years later. My point being the education space is being disrupted. It's being disrupted in bad ways, like the scandal. It's being disrupted in good ways, like this intersection of schools and companies and thinking about this stuff in different ways. All that kind of collects together for me. And by the way, I do think we are enlightened, just to be on the record. To your point. But I'll just add one more thing to it. I think that it's also leadership of the company choosing to invest in this ahead of the curve is a really smart thing. I know just our leadership is intensely invested in not just announcing this, but making it be incredibly successful and meaningful. And I think that's really important for those that are successful or not.
One thing I just want to touch on, and we're talking in advance of the discussion today, is you mentioned the term working adult. And in many cases, when we use that term, we're thinking about older age working adults, right? But it's been interesting because one of the things you noted at Disney was that you've got a fairly high percentage of pretty young employees who are taking advantage of it. So they're working adults, but in a traditional age kind of college student setting. So I want us to kind of break away from the thinking that working adult means, the 37-year-old, parent, et cetera. That's part of it. That's definitely part of it. But you're seeing some good uptake with younger employees with this as well.
I think like a lot of things in this space, there are truths that have been accepted for a long time that are not necessarily true today, and that has to do with what the definition of a working adult is, what the definition of a benefit is in the workplace, what the definition of wellness versus well-being is. We have a lot of things that need to be unpacked and understood that today's reality is different than what we've long held true.
Yeah. And so, Gary, as a transition to you, Brandman is a university that has largely designed itself to serve working adults in very important ways. And so obviously these partnerships with large employers are very different than university to student, or what we might think of as the B2C model in higher ed. So tell us what's fundamentally different about that in terms of how you guys have built Brandman to be purposed around that. I know we had an interesting conversation around metrics and accountability too that I hope you'll talk about as well.
Sure, absolutely. Well, let me tell you a little bit about Brandman. So we were part of Chapman University, and about 10 years ago we decided the needs of non-traditional students, it was university college, and we had been doing it for many years, and we became very aware that the needs for non-traditional students are very different than the needs for traditional students. And so we were looking at what's the best way to satisfy those needs in a manner that honors Chapman values on quality and student success. And we decided that becoming a separate, nonprofit, regionally accredited institution was a way to do it, and that gave us the freedom to redo what we did totally consistent with the needs of non-traditional students. So our students all get coaching. We have a very intense advising model that complements what Guild is doing. We have one-stop student services. Most importantly, we redesigned our curriculum so that our students, when they graduate, have knowledge, skills, and abilities that are in demand by the employers. They've learned soft skills, again, teamwork, critical thinking, diversity, world perspective, creativity, that are all valued by employers. We got rid of remedial courses. We have co-requisite remediation. So we did everything we could to make our students successful. And when you market to non-traditional students, well, non-traditional students, a lot of them are first generation. They're no longer in high school, so they don't have the advantages of a counselor. They don't have the advantages of friends that are going to school. They don't have all the support network, and they don't do visits. They don't do all the things that traditional students do. And they have a very hard time deciding on a good school. And I think it's very consistent with what John said. And as a result, they make bad choices, and we've all heard about them incurring debt and not graduating or graduating with a worthless degree. And that's why what Guild is doing and what these employers, our good friends at Disney and Discover are doing is so important, because they are taking the time and effort to make a careful selection of what institution is best for the students. So B2C is really difficult. We do a lot of things to make our students successful. It's hard to communicate that digitally. But when we spend time with Guild and they go over our outcomes, they go everything we do to achieve those outcomes, they meet with the management team, and then we get a second review by the employers. All that investment we do to make our students successful is really important. And just a note, if you look at IPED's graduation rates, and I know Guild looks at things more, much more carefully than that, but if you just look at that and look at the non-first-time graduation rates, which are more relevant, you'll see there's tremendous differences in institutional graduation rates. And that's something that wouldn't necessarily be apparent unless you do your homework. So the work that Guild and these employers are doing is crucially important in helping students be more successful.
Yeah. And so, Cara, Brandman is an example of essentially a university got spun out, right, to kind of serve specifically this kind of a need in the marketplace. You're doing this from a large public university. Tell us how it's been different in your world.
Yeah, I think so. We're aiming to put a little bit of Brandman and a microcosm into our public, Research One institution, which is extremely exciting and challenging at the same time, as you guys can imagine. But I think we realized very early on the difference between one of our online students who had the support structure of a tuition assistance platform with their company than one who didn't have one. And that was very, very real and apparent to us. So that's what really was the impetus for us to start our corporate initiative and start working with companies to create partnerships to make that even more accessible for that employee and student. But then we quickly found that some companies are much better at it than other companies. And that as a Research One public institution, we could do all we could around our Arizona Online program to develop it in such a way that it meets the needs of working adults. And there's amazing things that can be done and are being done in that arena. But we did not have that influence on the employer. We weren't in the business to be a consultant to the employer about how they should do their tuition assistance and reimbursement program to make the outcomes better and to create degree attainment, which is obviously our ultimate goal for the employee students. So being able to partner, work with a company like Guild who helps on the employer side, just creates better partnerships on our end and allows the University of Arizona to be better engaged, to have more of an impact then on that partner.
So I'm going to swing back to Chris and John a little bit. Look, you guys have a lot of different levers as an employer to pull in terms of supporting talent acquisition strategies, right? Talent development, talent retention. There's a lot of different dimensions we can talk about in there. There's a whole set of benefits that are offered beyond these. Like, where do you stack up this kind of a benefit, right? Or I'd call it a strategy, right? Because I think you both have talked about it that way, with all the other benefit levers that you can pull. Like, where does this sit? Where would you, do you prioritize it at the very top of the list? I'm just curious how you think about it in the set of other tools that you guys can bring to this process.
Go ahead, you want to go?
Well, so I'm the learning guy. I'm going to think of this as the most important thing we do, right? But I do think that all of our other benefits are going to be our commodities. They may be a little bit better, a little bit worse. When was the last time you heard of someone going to go work at a company because their dental plan was great? It just doesn't happen. And I think what we've done in the past 2 years is taken our education assistance and moved it, from something that we had to prioritize, along, a side. Dental and vision and medical, and sort of said, no, this is something different. This is about acquiring the best talent. This is about retaining the best talent. This is about growing their skills. This is about infusing the company with enhanced capabilities. So I think from the way we think about it, we don't really think about it as a benefit. Because it's so much more to us. Now, for our employees, I think they should think about it like, this is the best benefit that I can get. But from an employer standpoint, it's more of a talent play.
When we were designing this program, we announced our commitment to it last January 2018, and had it live in August of 2018. 6 months and 24 days, but no one was counting.
Definitely not.
I may have been. Here's what we looked at when thinking about this. We looked at we believed in choice. We ultimately came to, we need to create choice. I wanted to give our employees and our cast members choice of multiple universities. I wanted them all to be universities that had great outcomes, universities that were committed to their students succeeding. But I also wanted it to be different. So we've got everything from trades to high school up to master's degrees and everything in between. And we've just seen that once you communicate that choice, there's a value proposition, right? Once you communicate that value proposition and do it in a way that is both, first and foremost, employee-centered, and then broaden it to be of benefit for their career long-term, which means employer-centered, and just great things happen. We've got, in 7 months since we've launched, nearly 40% of eligible employees have signed up, taken the first step towards education. Over 10% of unique individuals that are eligible have an application into school, and over 6% have either completed already a course of study or are in school today in just 7 months. And to me, what that's teaching me is there's something about the value proposition on the practical side of the coin, which is it's about career. Right? People want to have a career. They want to grow a career. And sometimes that career is going to be a future role at Disney, and sometimes that's going to be something. We have a lot of jobs. Frankly, if you can name a job, we probably have it. But having said that, we don't have a lot of every job. So if somebody leaves and gets their education with us, that's awesome, right? So there's the practical side of it. But the biggest momentum thing, the biggest value thing to me is the higher purpose piece of it. And we're committed to the higher purpose of it. Let me give you some examples. We get stories from Guild, whether you're listening in, as John mentioned, or you read the stories. And, there's a grandfather whose grandson asked him, Grandpa, where did you go to college? And Grandpa had to say, because he was supporting his family his whole life, that he never went to school. But now that he's retired and he works for Disney, he's going to Disney Aspire because he wants to show to his grandkids that nothing is ever unattainable, right? And or the young person that started as a Jungle Cruise skipper and wants to be a leader and is working their way up to become a leader. Those are immeasurables, those are big bets, but I think those demonstrate in a huge way a commitment to a higher purpose. And when you, at least for us, when you lead with that, the practical stuff, then the value add stuff follows.
Yeah, yeah, it's neat. So speaking from my own personal perspective, Kaplan has a policy where not only can employees, but family members, immediate family members, including parents, siblings, can also enroll in Purdue Global, right, which was formerly Kaplan University. And so I'm actually trying to convince my dad to enroll in a master's program with me so we can go through it together. So I'll keep you posted on the status of that. He's turning 80 this June, and he's intimidated by taking classes online, but I think we'll get him over that somehow. So, but you're right. I mean, there's lots of powerful stories that are kind of embedded in this that are beyond, it goes beyond benefit, in the basics of that. So, Rachel, I want to come back to you. You're having a lot of conversations with employers, right? You're obviously having a lot of conversations with the university partners that are part of this. There has probably always been a disconnect between higher education and employers in terms of things like the definition of being work ready. Thinking about what do employers want and how can we better align to that. Like, we are still struggling with that in a lot of ways. Do you see this as a way to build better understanding, right, where we actually improve the outcomes for students? And I'm thinking very specifically about work readiness, right? Like, one of my favorite stats is that 98% of provosts of colleges and universities think they're doing a good job preparing students for success in the workplace. Only 11% of C-level business executives feel the same way about college graduates, right? So we've got a little bit of a difference of opinion probably in our definitions. There's a lot going on there. But kind of going back to this, right, do you see this as a way to actually improve the efficacy of both employment and college because they're coupled together very tightly?
We do. So I think you look at the era today of the digital world we live in, and I think some of the most powerful innovation in America today and the world is happening in marketplaces. And we believe what we've brought together is a marketplace of the best universities and learning providers, and worth reminding that we've got students in high school completion and trades programs and the whole gamut up through master's degrees, and then the most thoughtful and innovative employers on the other side who want to figure out how to crack this nut. And I think the marketplace model is a really powerful, important one there that has also solved tons of other problems in other sectors, be it healthcare, manufacturing, distribution of goods, you name it. So we approach it thinking about it like a marketplace. I think what that enables us to do is to cut down the cost of information moving between those two pipes. You think of a marketplace like a spider. We think of our legs as going out to the best universities and best employers in the world, and we think of our data that's at the center of the spider corpus right there as the place where we're iterating and improving. So things we're able to see are, when we send 1,000 students who work in places like Chipotle and Taco Bell to a variety of schools around the US, they have the same background, the same training, same number of credits. We're effectively building control groups that allow us to look at how are those students doing. And we don't do it in a summative, punitive way. We do it in a way that allows us to give feedback to both the employer and the university to say, hey, here's where we're seeing things go really well. Here's some gaps in this program or with this training. And so I think tightening that feedback loop does something really powerful. I think the most important thing it should do is eliminate this false choice that we've told low-income America that they have to choose between workforce development and higher ed. And I think it is something wrong we've done. We've said, oh, wealthy people get to make the choice, they just go to higher ed and then they'll figure out workforce development later, whether they learned any skills in those ivory towers or not, myself included. Or we've said to low-income students, sorry, just go do that training. You should just do a training. You don't need college, right? Like, go learn to be a plumber. We think we've been able to bring together those two options and the two entities that control those worlds such that students no longer have to make the choice and they can believe that they can have both career progression and academic progression.
Yep. And look, I think both the universities have already mentioned examples of things that you're either doing or have learned to kind of better serve students and employers, right? Because you essentially now have a couple of customers that are very important. Give us some more examples of things that you've either already started to do differently as a result of this. I know University of Arizona is brand new. I think, what did you do? You announced this yesterday?
Yes.
So
yes.
in the 24 hours
done?
since you've been part of this, I'm just curious, the things you anticipate needing to do differently,
Sure.
right? Or that you're already doing differently to kind of be in position to better support that. And Gary, you could comment on it too. So yeah, Cara, do you want to start?
Sure, absolutely. So we just announced our partnership with Guild yesterday, but we've been doing this for 3 years or so, working with partners and corporate partners. And you know, what everyone says up here it is absolutely true. It's those companies that are providing this as much more than just an HR benefit is where we're seeing the best student outcomes. And what we're excited about is that then what we haven't really seen before is these partnerships are helping us influence what degrees, what programs, what certificates we're going to be offering. And for example, you know, we didn't have an organizational leadership program 3 years ago. Now we do, because we know that's one of the most popular programs that working adults would like. Our Bachelor of Science in Business Administration, when we started 3 years ago, was not online yet. We said, absolutely, that has to go online immediately because of these corporate partnerships. So they've greatly influenced what we're doing from an academic perspective, in addition to, you know, being able to service them and provide the support structure that their employees need.
Right. Yeah, we think it's really important that, you know, as I said earlier, that the degrees are designed in a way where students will, you know, pick up the knowledge, skills, and abilities that they need to be successful in the corporate world. So that, you know, we will work with the companies and have validated all of our degree programs with them to make sure that they are relevant for what they want their employees to know. We validated also with Burning Glass to make sure those are skills that are in the marketplace that are in demand. Making sure that these students spend their time and these companies spend their money ensuring that their graduates are able to be useful in the workforce right away is crucially important to us. We learn from them, you know, they all have fabulous learning and development departments, and you can see they have wonderful leadership in those departments. And we work with them to articulate credits as well, where we are bound by regional accreditation standards, so we will help them understand them and optimize those credits that transfer as well. Because they do such fabulous work, and it's really important that that credit can be used and validate the quality work that they do. So we work very closely with them in ensuring that their staff are successful.
Yeah.
You know, I can give you two examples of how this marketplace makes both companies and universities better, and I've just seen it firsthand. I mean, for us, you know, we had this tuition reimbursement policy, and it turns out that there's nothing in your career that's going to prepare you to actually write a tuition reimbursement policy in your life. I mean, I didn't go to that class. So, I was actually some of the feedback that we got early on is like, hey, you know, you might want to pay for courses even if the student fails it. And instead have a GPA requirement. You got to keep your GPA at 2.0. And actually, when I was call listening, you know, there's a woman who was getting coached on accounting. She had failed the first time. Now, old world, we would have stuck her with a $2,000 bill for that semester. She probably would have looked at that and said, "There's no way I can pay that," and she would have disappeared. You know,
Yep.
and she would have quit, and she would just.
Yep.
Left. And instead, there's a conversation with the coach talking to her about how she could do better job. She was getting an A in accounting. I mean, she learned a few things. Her GPA was going to be fine. On the university side, one of our early partners, we partnered with them for a variety of reasons. They looked like they were really good. When Guild actually helped us understand what data we should be looking at, and at the final selection, we said no. We look at your student success metrics, and they're not good enough for what we'd like to offer our students. And interestingly enough, they really turned around their program, and they're probably going to come back into the network in the future. And that was a really good example of, you know, we wouldn't be able to give that market signal without the reducing the information asymmetries, and that's what you know what Guild's done for us.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Well, look, we weren't supposed to take questions from the audience. We've got a full 10 minutes left, and as long as the panel's okay, I would love to see if there's any questions out here. You just have to try to speak up as best you can. I'm sure we can hear you, but yes, sir.
Sure. The programs that are offered, are they primarily degree programs? Do they range from certificates and short courses? What's the nature of that?
Wide range, everything from high school completion, certificates, associates, bachelor's, masters, and the trades, which are primarily certificate. But back to my point earlier around the false choice, what we strive for is anytime we have students doing something that's short course, certificate-based, credential, that it does stack up into the degree. Because the thing we feel really passionately about is not creating a false choice for the student of saying, you need to choose if you're doing an associate's versus a cert. And so ensuring that anything that is modularized does stack into something greater such that they're preserving that optionality and avoiding the terminal nature of, say, an AAS, which sometimes slams the door shut for a student.
Other questions? Yes, sir, over on the right.
For the universities involved in the partnership, to what extent are you managing concerns about the potential for commoditization? I don't know the particulars about how Guild navigates the choices that employees get presented with, so maybe there's mechanisms in place, but is that a concern for the institutions, the idea that multiple universities may offer a BA in business, and how that gets either traffic or presented to employees? I'd love to hear from the university perspective about it.
Yeah, it's kind of tricky how the employees will make that decision, but over time there's word of mouth within the various companies, and so that will kind of work its way out on its own. Where if you do a good job, that will become more popular within an institution. But there's no question giving them a lot of different choices like that may be difficult. I think the choice between a research institution and one that's more focused on that's not a research institution on workforce development types of competencies is a choice that students will make. As you get into the same kinds of institutions, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
I think that, one of the big reasons we wanted to partner with Guild is because we know we can't be everything to everyone, and we don't want to be everything to everyone, right? We are a certain type of university, and a certain type of employee student is going to do fantastic with us. Other types are not. And so that's why we like to be in a group of curated universities that maybe meet a lot of different needs. There may be similar degree programs, absolutely, but I think there's definitely different approaches to those degree programs, and different classes, different requirements, different things like that. So I think it naturally kind of makes itself known where these students should be going and where they're going to be most successful, and that's what we want. We want degree attainment. So if they're going to be able to do that somewhere else better than at the University of Arizona, that's great. If they are going to be able to do it with us, that's what we want.
Yeah, one thing I'd add is, if you think about it now, how do universities compete for students? They do it through U.S. News and World Report. They increase the selectivity, so they have higher rankings in U.S. News and World Report. They have, they have marketing efforts. They have sports teams. Ultimately, I think universities should be competing against each other based on student outcome measures. And I would say that, that this is an enormously helpful environment in which you actually have more of the data brought to bear, and you have companies making choices based on what universities are going to drive the highest success for their employees. And I think that's very hard to do as a consumer. If you have kids that are thinking about college, it's really hard to actually make an informed choice about what the right university is for your child, much less think about your employees.
Yeah, I think it's a really important point that we talked about around accountability and the kind of metrics that are flowing, right? You realize that through the employer's view, with enough volume of employees participating in this, right, and with the metrics from the university side and the employer side, you now have a different kind of a rating and ranking, which is on the actual performance, right, on outcome measures. And so that, I think, is going to be, it won't be in the same form of the kinds of rankings and ratings we're used to now, but that will be a Consumer Reports esque kind of framework where you'll be able to see a university's either performing for my employees or they're not, right? They're kicked out or they're invited in, all these kinds of things. And to be able to send those signals around where there needs to be room for improvement, this is a different era of accountability beyond what we've created in the traditional environment. So yes, sir, you here, and then I'll come to the front here.
I'm just curious, is this a benefit that's very much focused on the employees and their own individual aspirations, or how much of it is aligned with the strategic priorities of your organizations and the skills that need to sort of feed into the next generation of your workforce? How are you kind of meshing those two things together?
I would say strategic priorities for all of our businesses, though that's what looks different. So I think you can speak to yours, which is why Disney chose a broader depth of choice, and then Discover had a specific set of strategic priorities around skills acquisition for particular things like cyber and business. But I think it's always oriented around the strategic priority of the business, but we live in such a diverse, heterogeneous economy today that we've seen companies who have very different strategic priorities.
Yeah, so we're centered around two things. We're actually centered around both, right? So if you think about what the jobs are that we're going to need, we know those jobs and we know the traditional ways that we recruit for those jobs via talent acquisition or otherwise. So what we wanted to have was we wanted to create, we have over 100 different degree programs that are a part of Disney Aspire, and it's across everything that the Guild was awesome to help us bring to the fold. So I knew that I wanted to create that much choice because as talent acquisition is out doing that, this can be a totally new pipeline to move in, and I had to create more choice to do that. So that's on the business side, and then being able to articulate like organizational leadership. Like that can be a career path for you if you want to get into operations leadership in our parks, as one example. So we have to articulate that back to our employees. Then on the employee side, we also wanted it to be, there's tremendous choice here for you. You don't have to stay with Disney. We'd love it if you do, but if you want to go and become, we have nurses' jobs, but if you want to go and become a nurse somewhere else and that be your full-time job, that's great, go do that. So I think there's benefit to both, and I think at times you're kind of squeezing either the strategic workforce side of it more, and then you're squeezing the employee-centered side of it more, but you have to keep both of those things in play for success.
And Chris, to your point about that, right, you and John have both said this, but the idea of an employee who leaves is not just okay to you, like that's actually something that, I mean, in not a way that you're, bracing like leave, right? But the idea that they leave and they look back and say, Disney helped me get my degree, right? That I mean, I think you were saying it as a brand ambassador of sorts. So
yeah,
even the outcome of we didn't retain them, that's still, there's a benefit there.
I mean, look, you don't want employees to leave and go, I hated my job and I hated my workplace, right? You do not want employees to leave for those reasons. But employees that leave, that go, oh my God, Disney was absolutely perfect for me. It was a great job at a great time in my life. They paid 100% of my tuition. They paid all my books and fees, and now I have this career and I never would have had it without them. Like, that's amazing.
Not a bad outcome.
It's a really good outcome.
Yeah. So we'll take one more question from the audience. Yes, sir.
On the accountability, so this is for John. You're in a unique position that you partnered with the Lumen Foundation to actually validate the ROI. What advice do you have for other companies that want to do some measuring of the outcomes to show that it's really making a difference in their own company? Yeah,
so I think what I learned was that the hurdle rate was lower than I thought. That ultimately, I think everyone needs purpose in their careers, and I think honestly, just striving to center your work around purpose, and most of the executives at your company have that challenge themselves. That how do I connect this work that I do every day to a broader purpose? And what we found is that when we had the ROI study and we could share it with our executives, they said, "That's good. You've given me enough to greenlight something that I kind of wanted to greenlight anyway." And I think what we found is that our executives didn't want to be accused of being of not doing some due diligence on the value of these programs, but at the end of the day, if you could give them a pretext for approving the program, they're all ready to go. And so I would say my advice would be grab our study, use our study, see if that's going to work, and see if you don't have to do your own, because it took us a year and a half. So
Interesting. Yeah. We've got 30 seconds left. Anybody want to get the last word in?
Rachel?
That's a lot of pressure.
You're down to 20 now.
Yeah.
Okay. I would say the last piece we haven't talked about today that gets overlooked is the burden of the technology to administer. So John's team, for example, designed a very sophisticated program with different levels of contribution for different employees in different programs. We've yet to meet a university who could handle that on their own, so our software plays a pretty important role there. And if anybody wants to talk about the tech piece, we're here and happy to talk about it.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much to this great panel. Thank you all for joining us. I'm sure they'll be hanging around. Appreciate it. Good job, guys.